Rangers lead the way, gentlemen. This is going to be part one of our ambush class, and I'm splitting it into two parts because ambush is it sounds super easy on the surface, and people think that it's a relatively straightforward idea. There's a lot of little nuances that I want to dive into, as well as history of the ambush, and maybe a little bit more advanced look on TTPs and kind of like different things you need to keep into account when setting up an ambush, when planning an ambush, or when trying to conduct a hasty ambush, and how to prevent and react to an ambush yourself. This isn't going to be a react to ambush class. That's going to be a separate battle drill that we'll cover later on, but kind of like what you need to know to plan a good ambush, and then being able to kind of reverse engineer that and be able to recognize, hey, this would be a good spot for the enemy to ambush us and my unit. So without further ado, we're going to get right into it. So what is an ambush? An ambush is a surprise attack from a covered and concealed position, or just concealed on a moving or temporarily halted target or targets, to harass, interdict, or destroy the target, or to temporarily seize the target, to secure information, confuse an adversary, capture personnel or equipment, or to destroy capability, culminating in a planned withdrawal. So it's a little bit more of an in-depth answer to what an ambush is, or more in-depth definition, as there's a lot of reasons you would need to do an ambush. Like, it could be, hey, there's this specific truck is carrying some missiles or something, or in the case of a vehicle interdiction is almost an ambush. I would say it's a little bit different, but like the intent to, if you know that there's someone that you need to capture that's going to be traveling along a certain road at a certain point, an ambush would be a good way to potentially do that. So it's not necessarily just to destroy capabilities or just to kill people. It could be to harass. Maybe you just do a quick little ambush and then break contact in the attempt to lure the enemy force into a into a trap or something of the sort. So there's two different types of categories. We have a hasty ambush and we have deliberate. So a hasty is conducted when the unit makes visual contact with an enemy force and has time to establish an ambush without being detected. And this needs to be well rehearsed. It needs to be a battle drill, like the platoon or the squad or the company even needs to know, like, hey, this is what happens when we get this call for a hasty ambush. Like, every squad knows what they're going to be doing. Like, security is going to push out, either side up and down the road, and then you're going to have your machine gunners set up in front and get inflating fire on the enemy's approach, and then your assault squads are going to be positioned on the assault leg. We'll get into that a little bit more in depth here in a second. And the other thing about hasty ambush that you need to keep in mind is you have to be very confident in your ability to pull it off without being detected, and without, and to not ambush a force that's significantly larger than and more capable than your own. It wouldn't be a good idea. You might be able to do a deliberate ambush against an oversized or a outsized enemy, but setting up a hasty ambush, if you don't know, the terrain to the best of your knowledge, if you don't know the complete composition or estimated composition of the enemy force, like, it could go really wrong if you set up a hasty ambush, if it is a platoon on a battalion size element, like. So most of your ambushes that you're going to be planning are going to be a deliberate ambush, and this is what we're going to cover: hasty ambushes in this in part one, and then part two we're going to talk about deliberate. But deliberate is going to be conducted at a predetermined location against an enemy element that meets specific engagement criteria. So the element leaders need to know the size and composition, as well as weapons and equipment of the enemy. So this is, either done via reconnaissance patrols, or it's coming down from, the intel side of whatever unit you're in. Like, hey, like, we know this route, there's supply convoys that, travel along this road every other day. They've got, 2 escorts and 3 trucks. Like, knowing that, like, you'd be able to plan an effective ambush. And typically you're going to want to know exactly the size of the enemy force, or roughly the size of the enemy force before you set in an ambush, so you know exactly what you need to bring and how many people you need to bring. So there's different types of ambushes as well. So we have point, which rangers or individuals deploy to attack an enemy in a single kill zone. Then you have an area, which is 2 or more related point ambushes along an enemy's route, and you're going to need a platoon size minimum for this. Area ambushes are incredibly effective, as most ambush TTPs for vehicles is to attempt to drive through the ambush unless your vehicle is disabled and cannot physically drive, or if the road is blocked and you cannot physically get through. So an area ambush, if you do have, like, let's say 3 ambushes along a route, technically an area ambush, and that enemy comes along, they push through that first ambush, but they've taken damage to their vehicles. That second ambush has a better chance of taking them out and stopping them entirely and achieving whatever the commander's intent is. And even if they get through that one, you have the last area ambush or the last point ambush that you're able to hit them on. So you got to just it's something to keep in mind. Area ambushes can be very effective. It was used to great effect against U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and I want to say in Vietnam as well. But I remember reading, I don't remember which book it was, but reading about area ambushes that the Taliban would do on U.S. forces in Afghanistan, especially in the more mountainous regions. They were very effective. And then you have a near. So near ambush, typically within hand grenade range of an enemy, but can be a little bit further dependent on terrain and cover and concealment. And it's critical to establish overwhelming fire superiority to prevent the enemy from effectively reacting and doing any kind of near ambush battle drills. And it's good to know, if you can, what your enemy's TTPs are for near ambush. Like, we'll do a near ambush class so you'll understand the US's, but it's good to know, like, hey, like, oh, they are going to throw hand grenades. We're going to get just, it's still going to be a near ambush, but we'll be on the upslope, so we have a little bit more range with our grenades, and we're throwing downhill, versus if they try to initiate a near ambush, they're throwing grenades uphill and they might roll back down and we're going to be out of range, basically. So far is outside of hand grenade range, typo there, and it's initiated via command detonated explosive and or a crew served weapon. So most of your ambushes are typically going to be far. In Ranger School, I would say a lot of them classify probably as near ambushes. To be honest, a lot of them are really close to the roads that they have you set up ambushes along. In mountains, you can do some far ambush missions where you're, like I was talking about with near ambush, where you're up like on the side of a hill, shooting down on a road. All right, so now we're going to talk about ambush formations. So you've got linear, which is when your assault and your support elements are parallel to the enemy's route or road or whatever. This positions both elements on the long axis of the kill zone and subjects the enemy to flanking fire. In some cases, you can kind of get a little bit of enflating fire with your support weapon system, dependent on the micro terrain, if you will. You can definitely achieve diagonal fires or oblique fires, and refer back to my machine gun theory class if you don't know what I'm talking about here. And like with oblique and enflating fires, go watch that. That's kind of a small prerequisite to this class. And then you have the classic L-shaped ambush. So the assault element is placed parallel to the enemy's route on the long leg, and then the support element is placed perpendicular on the short leg. Like it, this allows the elements to achieve both flanking and enfilade fire. You use it at sharp bends in a trail, road, or a stream, but it should not be used if the short leg is going to have to cross the kill zone, or the road. So if it's a bend in the road in the opposite direction, you can't get across the road to effectively set up that short leg. You can't. It's not going to work for you. So they take a little bit more planning in regards to what approach you take to the ambush site. All right, so here's kind of what those look like. So you got your security, which are going to be your early warning for the enemy. And then you've got your rear security. This is your linear ambush formation. So obviously your support is going to be furthest away from the templated direction of travel. And then you have your assault element. And now this is your classic L shape. So security, and then your support and your assault. So you've got, the ability to achieve enflating fires as the enemy is coming from this direction here. This does take a little bit more control measures, as well as making sure those guns really know their hard right limit in this case, so that they don't accidentally take out any assaulters. So here's another example of an L shape. This is a squad size element. You've got your kill zone, you've got your limit of advance, you got your left flank security team, which in a squad is going to just be a buddy team. And then you've got your right flank security team. You've got your machine gun team here. You've got the rest of the squad here. And then your rally point and ORP, which we'll talk about later. Now, we're going to talk about more exotic ambush formations, and maybe you might not have heard of any of these. And there's some in here that I hadn't heard of myself. And I discovered these in the book Special Reconnaissance and Advanced Small Unit Patrolling by Lieutenant Colonel Ed Wolkoff, retired. Pretty interesting book. The dude knows a lot about, the tactics used in the Vietnam War. He fought in the Vietnam War. He was on an SOG team. And there's some, I guess, more... like I call them exotic because you're not going to ever probably use these except in rare circumstances when they just, would work the best. And we'll talk about them here. So the first one is a V ambush. And so this is positioned with the mouth open towards the enemy advance. And it's best to utilize an elevated terrain above a valley, allowing the legs of the ambush formation to achieve both plunging and interlocking fires. The apex of the V should ideally be the most elevated position to achieve enfilade fires, and then positions on either leg are sequentially lower from the apex so that their fires are directed downward at the enemy and not towards friendly opposite positions. And we'll show a little graphic of that here in a second. And you have your Z ambush, which is a variant of the L shape, but it's an added short leg to the opposite end of the long leg, anticipating that the enemy will attempt to flank the long leg during the ambush. And again, we're going to show you a graphic here. So this is your V-shape ambush. So as you can see, based on the contour lines here, this is, raised terrain. This is a valley with a road running through it. So you have your support element here with your light machine gun, RPG, and then mortar team. And this is, you're able to shoot down into the enemy without, doing a Polish ambush essentially on your own guys. So being able to shoot down and towards the enemy is very effective. It's very hard to initiate a counter ambush or, ambush battle drills, react to ambush battle drills up a freaking mountain when you're getting shot at from both sides. Like, this is a very effective, and it was used in great effect against U.S. forces in Vietnam in a few different areas where they would have to, the U.S. forces, we had to travel through a valley again and again, and the NVA were able to just ambush our asses along these valleys. So this is that Z ambush here. So, so it's an L shape. So here's your L, here's your support, your short leg, your support leg, you got your assault leg, and then you've got a second leg. So it's like kind of a Z here. And this is, let me go back. This is anticipating that the enemy is going to initiate some kind of, battle drill in which they're going to flank our long leg here. So you've got, a small team here with claymores and tripwires waiting for them to happen, waiting for the enemy to try and flank, in which case they're going to get stopped in their tracks by, something that they didn't expect. So I would say this is probably should be used more honestly than the L shape, because just about every single freaking modern military TTP involves flanking of some sort. So if you just anticipate they're going to flank and, set up measures to counter that, whether that be trip mines, claymores, a dedicated team, you just got to worry about that security element that they're, not going to be in range of this Z leg. But in all honesty, these guys could probably act as the security element. Just something to think about. And we got one more. So this is the Y formation, and this was developed by the NVA and specifically to counter SOG teams. SOG teams were small. They inserted, by night, and basically ghosts in the jungle. So they didn't have a templated direction of travel for these guys. Like, they knew that they were in the area, but they didn't know exactly which direction they would be coming from. And so the base of the Y consisted of one or more dug-in positions established laterally across a ridge, and then the wings of the Y were several positions established on the slopes to each side, descending rearward and diagonally from the base. So this was created as the enemy unit could not predict the team's direction of approach, whether they approached along the ridgetop, along the military crest, or down the draws on either side of the ridge. So this is that Y-shape ambush, and this is the high ground here. So they're assuming that they're going to be coming down this almost draw like area, and then you've got what looks like ridges here. So yeah, it's kind of hard to tell which is the high ground, which is the low ground, but going off of what the book says, like, this would be the high ground, this would be the ridge here that they're kind of coming off of, and then these would be draws on either side, or rather ridges. Spurs there, that's the word I was looking for. And they're basically able to anticipate that the US forces would be taking a somewhat easier route, and they knew that we would take them military crest of the hill. So if we were coming along here, walking the below the top of the ridge line, they'd be able to take us out and to initiate an ambush on us. And now, moving on, we're going to kind of do a little history lesson here. So ambushes have been around for a long ass time. Even, what we'd call today an L-shaped ambush. So we'll talk about in 217 BC, rather, Carthaginian general Hannibal lured the army of Roman general Flaminius, I'm not a Latin major, into an L-shaped ambush along the banks of the Lake Trasimene in Italy. So the short leg of the ambush was a massive wall of heavy infantry blocking the road, which blocked the Romans' advance. Once that advance was stalled, they were attacked from the left flank by light infantry from concealed positions along a ridge, and then obviously on the right flank was the lake. And then once they initiated that ambush, some more forces closed the road off to the rear, trapping them in basically a kill box. They're getting attacked from three sides, and on the last side is a lake. So of the initial Roman force of about 30,000, about 15,000 were killed or drowned trying to escape into the lake. And another 10,000 managed to escape, and then the last 5,000 or so were captured and taken as prisoners of war. So here's a graphic of what that looked like. So he lured the Romans to leave their camp here, and got them to come along the side of this lake, where they had a huge blocking force of heavy infantry, and then they had their Germanic and light infantry, light, agile, fast, attack their flanks, and then seal off the rear to prevent their escape. And their right flank was blocked by the lake, and swimming in armor is a terrible idea. So very effective ambush, and it's a textbook L shape. Even though they didn't have machine guns or anything too crazy besides maybe bows and arrows, the principles still apply. Blocking force and or support and assault, fire, maneuver. All right, we're going to go into Hasty Ambush quickly. We're not going to spend too much time on this. I have a range trip planned to go shoot a video here, so we're going to briefly go over Hasty Ambush. Some of the stuff might not make a whole lot of sense, as we haven't talked about Deliberate Ambush, so you might need to come back and rewatch this after part 2. So visual contact is made with the enemy, and that visual contact is maintained until that unit leader decides to initiate the Hasty Ambush. So if it was security squad leading out and they saw the enemy, they weren't detected, They're going to notify the PL. The PL is going to tell them to keep eyes on until he can get eyes on. And then that PL or squad leader is going to decide whether or not they're going to initiate hasty ambush. So if he decides to initiate the hasty ambush, he's going to, if they're traveling along a road, they might not try and immediately hit them. They're going to try and move up the road in the direction that the enemy is going to be able to give them time to set in. So he's going to figure out exactly where they're going to go and hastily, set in this ambush. He's going to determine the size and extent of the kill zone and communicate that to his leaders. And then the teams and squads are going to move silently to cover and conceal positions, ensuring that they are undetected and have good observation into the kill zone. The security elements are going to move to cover the flanks and rear of the unit. Buddy teams, again, at the squad level, and fire teams at the platoon level. So security squad, Alpha team will be in charge of one flank, Bravo team will be in charge of the other. And, if you have a squad size element, it'll be your Bravo team that'll be in charge of security, and the rifleman and grenadier will go on one leg, and the saw gunner and team leader will go on the other leg. The platoon leader is going to assign sectors of fire and then issue any other control measures. So, hey, we're initiating on my M4, or we're initiating after I shoot this AT4, or we're initiating on, Joe's freaking 40 mic. So he's going to be the PL. If it's not his personal weapon, he's going to be right next to that individual with that weapon. You're going to always initiate with the most casualty producing weapon you have available. And if you have time, you're going to place your claymores. But a lot of the times you're probably not going to either A, have claymores, or B, have time to set them in effectively without getting compromised. So once the enemy enters the kill zone, they're going to conduct a mad minute. So everyone's going to go basically cyclic on the kill zone. And then they're going to cease fire after about a minute. The PL is going to be in charge of timing that. They're going to wait to hear sounds from the kill zone. If they do hear sounds, or they're still getting, returning fire, they're going to initiate another mad minute and repeat the process until you can no longer hear anything, or you're no longer taking effective fire from the kill zone. Once it's silent, this element is going to assault through and establish an LOA outside of hand grenade range if possible. If you're not on the side of a cliff. So like in Ranger School and Mountain Phase, there's roads where you'll be walking, and you'll have a high part of the road, and then over to the left, I'm trying to show it's going to just be a fucking drop off. So you might not be able to assault through effectively and establish a full LOA outside of the 35 meters. So just keep that in mind. But ideally, you're going to be outside of hand grenade range. A hasty search is going to be conducted. EPWs and enemy equipment is going to be secured, and then they're going to withdraw from the ambush site along a covered and concealed route. And then the PL is going to gain accountability, reorganize as necessary, disseminate any information, report the situation to higher, and take commands from higher as to what to do next, or they're going to continue their original mission set. So this is kind of a quick graphic directly from the Ranger Handbook of Hasty Ambush. So the enemy's spotted, maybe they're coming down the ridgeline, and they see an enemy convoy coming up a road that they're heading towards that they're going to initially maybe have to cross. And the PL determines, hey, we have enough people to take this on, and we're going to set up a hasty ambush. So security teams get pushed out, and then your assault elements are going to be alongside of the road. You might not be able to have time to set up a legitimate support by fire, but if you train it, you should be able to. But that's it. This is part 1 of our ambush class. Part 2, we're going to be talking about deliberate ambush, going in more in depth of what it looks like in Ranger School, and then talking, maybe a little bit more kind of advanced planning measures and planning ideas. But yeah, hopefully you learned something here, and we will see you next Tuesday. Y'all take care.